Welcome back to Beautiful Work, Beautiful Life. You are with two life coaches, and we're talking about your inner life. Let's see, the inner work that it takes to have a beautiful life. And we call that the beautiful work, which is how we got the title of our podcast, Beautiful Work, Beautiful Life. We're here to support you in developing your beautiful life. And this month, the month of May of 2025, we're looking at loss, disappointment, and letting go. And that's what we titled our show today. So, Laurel, hi, how are you?
I'm well. I'm so happy to be back with you.
I'm so happy to be here with you today. And I'm happy to be talking about this topic, which has, let's say, a lot of cultural problems around it. we don't handle all of these topics really well, do we? This loss, disappointment, and letting go.
Well, I think we might be able to handle the topic better than the act of loss, disappointment, and letting go.
Yeah, it's not
And
easy.
these
Yeah.
are tough parts of our life where I have been thinking it's inevitable.
Yeah.
Life includes loss, life includes disappointment, but that learning to let go and allow and release is really not easy.
I know. So, we could dig into so many places here. Is any place coming up for you that you know you want to just like dig right in and get going?
Well, I think digging into the letting go part is really like, what can we share with each other? What can we share with our listeners
Yeah.
about maybe in the past where we've needed to let go? And I know in some of our episodes before we've talked about resistance, but how to let go with grace and ease to allow life to unfold.
Ooh, I love that. I'll take a personal memory here to our conversation, and thinking back to when I was working with my therapist, that I had a lot of great, ahas and good healing work with back in the day. And I remember talking about letting go. And I think I had a revelation at that point where I realized letting go required first letting it be. And I
Yeah.
didn't know how to let go, but I knew I could practice letting something be. And so that's kind of where I started with my learning how to let go.
So how did you do that? How can
Yeah.
you?
Yeah, I think it's probably why practicing acceptance is one of my, power practices in my inner power wheel of practices, that I write so much about. And I think it's that, the beginning of letting go is accepting, usually, that something has changed or something that we wanted is not happening. And so we have to kind of we have to let be what is and like really look at it and almost embrace it, right? Instead of
Yeah.
resisting it or thinking constantly about how we don't want it or we want something else. But first, just like really taking that moment to accept, embrace what is, letting it just be. Yeah.
And I love that as a practice because oftentimes, I do this and I've seen myself do this. I probably still do it. Is that it's easy to let go after the fact when hindsight is 2020, right? When I
Mhm.
can look back at a loss or a disappointment and see how my life evolved from that place and make peace with the loss or disappointment only because of where I've come, where I have come from that point,
Yeah.
right? A great example is I always wanted four children. Now I don't have four children,
Mhm.
and at some point in my life, I felt the disappointment that I was not going to have four children, or
Mhm.
more children for that matter.
Yeah.
And now when I look back on my life, I go, thank heavens I didn't have four children, right? And so that's the difference when I think about making peace with what is, right? Learning to let go as a practice
Yeah.
and accepting what is, it's in the present. It's not looking backwards.
Right. Right.
I can't wait. I'm going to pull out your inner world I'm sorry, your journal and really look at that as a
Yeah.
practice.
Right. Right. And, uh, you know, as I was listening to you, I was thinking about that idea of, the many losses of life, right? When we talked about that, you talked about that with Rachel and that idea of, losing a dream or a hope or a wish for your life is just as big as a death in the end, right? Because it is like a death. It's like the death of what we thought our life would be. And that, what you talk about, is a great example of that, you know? Yeah.
Yeah. Letting go of the plan,
Yeah.
right? And I think about this a lot, like the death of a plan.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's hard work when we think our life is going to be a certain way simply because we want our life to be a certain way and it's not.
Yeah.
Right? There's this fine line between acceptance and resignation, right? And so I think it's really important to let go with love and gratitude and and that acceptance of what is.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember talking about that difference, with my therapist as well, that difference between acceptance and resignation and what the difference is. And I think that's a really important discernment and distinction for everybody to get clear about, right? So we don't, when we're accepting something, we're not resigning ourselves to the fact that this is always going to be this way, or this was what was supposed to happen, or any of those kind of stories, right? We tell ourselves. It's more just really about accepting this is what is right now. And if I'm going to accept that truth, what does that mean for me? And oftentimes that's when we get into, oh, I feel sad. I feel disappointed. I feel like I was really holding on to this wish or desire for my life. And now I can see it's not shaping up that way. Like it becomes, I am having an experience right now and I have feelings around it. And I want to process that. I need to process that in order to come to terms with it, right? And I think because we
Yes.
resist so much emotional stuff in our culture, we get stuck in a lot of times, thinking thoughts about it, making stories about it, telling ourselves we got to be okay. And so we bypass the whole feeling the disappointment, feeling the loss, grieving the idea of what you thought it was going to be or whatever it is, right? And that's a process that we actually have to move through to get that energy, that emotion out of us, right? And so that we can go
Yes.
on to the next thing, whatever that might be.
Well, and I'm glad you mentioned the grieving because I do think we all suffer loss, some big, some small,
Mhm.
and we need to allow ourselves to grieve, that time to grieve in
Yeah.
order to let go.
Yeah. Yeah.
And thank you for like giving us that, the difference between resignation and allowing.
Yeah.
And I do think, the practice of feeling and naming the feelings, right? Being able to express emotion, be able to process emotion in whatever time you need. When in my conversation with Rachel, the her loss went on for a number of years as she tried again, and again to have more children. And that wasn't in the cards for her. She had to make peace with that. And that was repeated loss.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so when I think about that, it just her practice of gratitude, right? Feeling grateful when she had processed the loss and made peace with her emotions, and then leaned in to gratitude for what is, what was
Yeah. Right.
really important.
So interesting too, like we're talking about letting it be, right? And letting
Yes,
go, and how the beginning is that letting it be so you can let go. And then interestingly, how she used the letting it be as a way to tap into what was good in her life, right? To come back.
yes,
Because I always feel like in the classic grief cycle, that Elizabeth Kubler-Ross identified years ago. And some people like it. Some people think there's some aspects missing to it. But one of the stages is moving on. And for many of us, it's really hard to move on until you go through those stages before, right? And so Rachel, that idea of leaning into gratitude is almost a way to start that transformation into, what are we moving on to? And it's almost like, okay, what do I have in my life right now that's good that I can build on and look to, and then develop this, whatever the new dream is or the new experience is going to come from. Yeah.
Yes. And then as we were talking, one of the things that came up for me really loudly was um, being able to pinpoint or identify what is it in that dream that you wanted to experience, not the things, but the feeling that you wanted to
Yeah.
experience. And so if I think about this, like with my example of wanting more children, I loved being a mother. I loved every part of it.
Me too.
Loved being pregnant.
No, I didn't like
I
that.
loved having a child. I loved being a mother. I
Mm.
loved nursing. I loved all of it. And so if I can identify what what it was that I wanted to continue in my life, right? I wanted to be nurturing. I wanted to be playful. I wanted to be caring and protective. And how can I be those things even though I didn't have a third and fourth child?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? So if we can identify what it is we want to feel in the dream that we're holding on to, how can we bring that to life in some other way?
That's great. I love that. I love that. Uh, the other thing that's coming up as I'm thinking about our title, Loss, Disappointment, and Letting Go, is thinking about how much work I do with clients around the disappointment that is usually underneath a lot of our anger. And so, for many of us in our culture, we're more comfortable with anger. We're more comfortable with talking about anger or, expressing anger, or somehow anger doesn't feel as intimidating or scary as disappointment, because disappointment often makes us cry. And heaven forbid that we cry with one another. And so I feel like, you know, every time we are angry, right, it's a worthwhile question to ask yourself. And besides being angry about this, what might I be disappointed about as well?
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. And in addition to anger, because for some of us, anger is not acceptable, right?
Mhm.
It might show up in as frustration.
Right.
It might show up as resentment,
Right.
right? I can think about, how many times I might have been snarky in a response to someone, but it really is because I am mad as hell, but
Yeah.
I can't tell them, right? And
Yeah.
so identifying anger in its many forms
That's great.
is really important.
Yeah. So, for those of you listening who might be a little confused by this or not sure about anger, I would say I always think of anger as being like a continuum from really mild irritation to extreme rage. Like, everything between those things are variations of anger.
Yeah,
Yeah. And with every single one of them, you should be able to identify a disappointment that's below the anger somewhere, right?
absolutely.
Yeah. If you're going to begin the process of being more adept at handling your emotional state, and then also being able to move through the transformation of going from anger to making peace, right, with whatever's going on. We talk a lot about anger and boundaries. There's a whole episode that we talked about anger and how to deal with anger, so we can go back and refer to that. But for now, right, just remembering that anger can also be a clue to helping you handle your disappointments and losses in life as well. Yeah.
Yes. So
Yes.
we can put in the show notes
Mm-hmm.
an
Yeah.
prior episode about anger. And it reminds me, we had in season one, an episode on grief. And so we
Yes.
can put that in the show notes as well.
Right, right, absolutely. And we've talked about loss of relationships, and I think that oftentimes when we think about grief and we think about loss, we kind of anchor into that idea of loss of a relationship or a person or a pet, a beloved in our life, right? And yet loss is so much more than that. It's just, my goodness, I think about aging, all the losses, the opportunity that we have of letting go of what we used to be and becoming, an older person in life. There's so many losses along the way and so much opportunity to practice getting good at loss through the aging process. Yeah.
There is, and I'm finding that too. And part of that is making peace with who
Hmm.
you are now in the present,
Yeah.
right? And so, thinking about loss, it might be loss of your former self.
Yeah.
And that happens too, the loss of identity, right? That happens in a divorce, that happens in a loss of a job.
Yeah.
And, uh, you know, also, and thinking about Rachel's episode and the loss of the dream of motherhood, which
Right.
she finally has, but
Yeah.
but it's the identity that we get tied to and hold on to that really makes it hard for us to accept the what is.
Right, right. And yet, it's interesting when you really think about how life is designed, right, as a human and as we're aging, and we do have to let go of roles, self-definitions, the way we've always done things, whatever it is, right? It's the opportunity to see ourselves as a more whole being and also to have compassion for all of life around us, that we're all here temporarily having some experience and we aren't going to be here forever. And so, what are you going to do with the precious time that you have? And how are you going to make the most of it, so to speak?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's,
And I love that because just thinking about our title, loss, disappointment, and letting go, right? How are you going to make the most of what is now?
yeah. Yeah. And I think with letting go, I mean, a real letting go is like a death, it is a process where when we really do let go, we are saying goodbye.
Bye.
It is a
Yes,
big goodbye.
absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's not easy. And I always feel like, even the people that I've loved in my life that have moved on and passed from this world, it's like, remembering that I can go back and almost be with them inside myself, right? Hear their voice inside myself, feel them in my heart, remember what they gave me, what I learned from them from just being in relationship to them, right? How do we remember that they may be gone from this life, but we carry forth what was the gem, sort of the
Mm.
treasures of that relationship, Yeah, really. Yeah. Yeah,
And
big stuff.
all of that can be used in the loss of situations, right? I mean, when I think about, and I talked about it in the first episode this month, right? The unexpected loss of my corporate role, right?
Yeah.
I can take all of the good, all of that I became in that role.
Mm.
I can take that and hold it with me, right? And continue it in another experience in my life. No different than, I think about the loss of my parents. I can take all the goodness of the relationships with them and move it forward into another experience.
Yeah.
Um, so I do think we can process loss. I don't want to say it's the same because some are big and some are little, but the becoming and the learning and the processing probably is very similar if we look at it as a practice.
Yeah. Yeah. I do think that that's true. And I think the beginning practice is letting it be what it is and naming your loss, naming your emotional experience, moving through your emotional experience really consciously, not trying to get out of it too fast. I know in our culture, we often try to hurry, move through it quickly, or we expect it should be faster or whatever. And I think that's one of the ways that we really fall short in supporting each other. That loss and disappointment takes as long as it takes to get over it. And when we're ready to develop the new life and move beyond it, then we do. And, maybe you're ready, maybe you're not. I don't think you can force it really.
No, and I'm glad you brought that up because I do think sometimes, something might happen that years later after an experience of loss, something might happen that has us feeling all those feelings again.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I do think that for our listeners, give yourself grace.
Mhm.
Don't expect, a certain time period, and don't expect it to be forever. That some things might trigger a sense of loss, and the loss could have happened years ago.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think when we're talking about trauma and loss, that's even another, shall we say, aspect of healing. That's even more, sometimes more complex than what we're talking about today in
Yes.
the show,
Yes.
right? So a
Yes.
traumatic loss is your nervous system's deeply affected, and there's a lot of healing that has to go on there in many respects, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's another episode for another day.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, yeah.
so
So,
thinking about if there's anything you want to leave our listeners with, what might it be today?
well, let's see. I would say, one of the suggestions that I make in the Live Your Inner Power Journal is if you really are dedicated, right, to getting good at moving through loss, and let's say you even know that the losses of your life are disrupting your ability to enjoy life today.
Mm,
One of the ways that I encourage people to look at it is almost make a timeline. Move yourself from maybe now to the beginning of your life, or vice versa, from the beginning of your life till now. Maybe take it in 5-year chunks, right? So, first 5 years of life, do you remember any big losses, any big disappointments that you experienced, right? And then just mark them down as like an event, right? And go through all those things in your life. And then after you've kind of made your inventory and you know what's there, then it's looking at, how much have you processed of that event as you look at each one individually. And I always feel like when we've moved through a loss completely, and we've gone on to the next stage of life, right? And we're engaged in life well. Usually we can look back at a loss and say, what is my pearl of wisdom? What did I gain from that experience? What is the treasure from having gone through that? What did I learn about life? Like, what is my inner wisdom? How did I grow from that in a really important way? And I think if you can identify that, usually you've mostly moved through the loss. You may still have feelings, you may have memories and bouts of being sad or whatever. But I think if you've gotten to the point where you can identify what was really good of it, it's almost like you can see the full circle of that.
yes.
Yeah.
It's
And
a practice that my first network care provider, Rich Gorsuch, had introduced me to, that I use still, and it happened for me. And it's a journaling practice
yeah.
where you write a situation, a scenario, and you write all that was in it that was for your highest and best self.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm going to warn, our listeners, don't do it too soon
Yeah. I know. I
because
know.
when that loss
It's
is
fresh.
is fresh, it's hard to see any goodness in a loss.
I know. It's too painful. You got to
It
move
is,
through the pain first.
yes.
Yeah.
But I have used this journal practice with things that happened. My mother's death. Now I was 33 and she was only 55.
Yeah. So, yeah.
Um, and my divorce from my first marriage,
Yeah.
even the loss of my job, right, at the end of my corporate career. Because now, after the fact, I can process those things and see the goodness that came out of it.
Yeah. Yeah. I know. I lost a lot of important people in my life at a young age, and I feel like every stage of my life, almost there was an important death, right? And I almost feel like for me, it's helped me a lot. Like I can see how it's helped me a lot in my work as a therapist and as a life coach, right? Because in order to help people move through loss, I've moved through my own big losses and had to come to terms with that, really do the grief work that's required, and then to do as I suggest, which is what did I gain from that? What are my treasures from all of those people and all of those experiences, right? And what do I hold dear from that?
Yes.
So I do think that, for each one of us, it doesn't happen right away. How did it happen for me? But at some point, we do see that often life is trying to organize to help us learn and grow and have the experiences we came here to learn. Yeah. Yeah. Tough.
And that might be a really good place for us to end today,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Because this life experience, no matter how long or how short it
Yeah.
is really to teach us in our becoming,
And are
right?
becoming. Yeah.
Yeah,
And interesting, Laurel, what's coming up as we close out the show is, for many of us who are struggling in the world today, right, and looking at living in America and all the changes that are going on, and many of us feel like we've lost so much is being lost right now. It's also, we can look through this lens as well, right? As a collective, not just as an individual, but as a collective. And so, right now, I almost feel like it's America's growing pains. What are we supposed to be learning and how are we supposed to be growing from what's going on in our lives today? And not always easy, but it's worth pushing ourselves into that territory and seeing the bigger picture rather than staying in the minutia of the loss. Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
And it wasn't that long ago that we had a collective experience and could learn from it. And during the pandemic in 2020,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
There was so much learning
I
and
know.
so much reflection, at least in the world I live in, like in my family, in my community.
Yeah,
When we go through these times,
yeah,
collective loss, there's really something better coming.
yeah, yeah. And also, to be able to examine, like I think back to, think about how did you individually go through that experience? What was hard for you about it, right? What did it teach you about yourself and what you needed and wanted from life? Like these are all like part of what can come to help us better understand ourselves and life if we are willing to do more than just a quick, oh, I don't want it to be like this, right? Oh, well, it is like this. So what are we going to do with it?
That's right.
Yeah.
The-
Let it be, then
Yes.
let it go. And what can we take away from it? Yeah.
Right. What can we learn and grow from it? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
Oh,
thank
Laurel,
you, Laurel.
thank you. And anyone who's out there suffering from, a really recent or deep loss, we send you our love and our heartfelt hopes that, the days will get easier for you, and know that it takes whatever time it takes. And we understand that. So just be kind and gentle with yourself.
That's right. Self-compassion, loving self-kindness, and
Yeah.
grace.
Yeah. All right. Off we go for now. We'll be back for more though.
See you soon. Bye
Bye
for
for
now.
now.